Brayson, Sophie Cunningham. Definitely, I look like she might be leaving now. I think this is so dope that she came to practice today. Now, Chloe Peterson.
Nobody walks into an NBA or WNBA practice and just starts running drills unless they belong there. So when footage surfaced of Cheryl Miller, the woman thousands of fans had been demanding as head coach actively coaching Indiana Fever players during training camp, the entire basketball world stopped scrolling. This wasn't a photo opportunity. This wasn't a ceremonial visit. She was on the floor, correcting footwork, demonstrating techniques, getting directly in players' faces. And somewhere in that same gym, the actual head coach, Stephanie White, was standing on the sideline watching. That image alone tells a story. The Indiana Fever are heading into the most scrutinized season in WNBA history, 44 nationally televised games, Caitlin Clark entering year 2, and a front office that already proved it will fire a coach who took them to the finals. The pressure is suffocating. The expectations are championship or bust. And before a single game has been played, the coaching situation is already raising questions that nobody in the organization seems eager to answer. What exactly is happening inside that gym? And does anyone actually know who's running this team? Section 1. A legend walks into practice. The moment Cheryl Miller showed up at Indiana Fever training camp, everything changed. Not because her presence was surprising, fans had been screaming her name since Christy Sides got fired, but because of what she was actually doing once she got there. Chloe Peterson, who covers the Fever and has direct access to the organization, confirmed Miller wasn't there for a one-day visit or some kind of ceremonial appearance. She was there for training camp, actively involved, working directly alongside the players from day one. Think about what that means for a second. The Fever just announced 44 nationally televised games for the 2025 season. Every single game on a major network. No other team in the league comes close to that number. The scrutiny this organization is about to face isn't just high, it's historically unprecedented for women's basketball. Every practice clip, every sideline reaction, every lineup decision is going to be picked apart by millions of people who are tuned in specifically because Caitlin Clark is on this roster. And right now, in the middle of all that pressure, the person fans wanted running this team just walked into the building and started coaching. Not observing, not consulting from a distance, actually coaching. The Fever haven't officially explained her role. No press release, no formal announcement, no clarity about what her title is or how long she's staying. That silence is its own kind of statement. Organizations that are completely comfortable with a situation don't stay quiet about it. They announce it, they frame it, they control the narrative. The fact that nobody has done that yet suggests this arrangement is either still being figured out or someone doesn't want it looked at too closely. Either way, the questions are already louder than any answer the Fever have offered. Section 2. The visual contrast. Nobody can ignore. Here's what the practice footage actually shows. Cheryl Miller is moving. She's demonstrating footwork, she's correcting positioning mid-rep, she's physically engaged with every single drill. There's an energy to how she operates on that floor that is immediately recognizable to anyone who has ever watched elite coaching up close. Now look at Stephanie White in those same clips, arms crossed, standing still, observing from a distance. Every time the camera catches her, she's in almost the exact same position, stationary, watching, not visibly directing anything. To be fair, not every coaching style looks the same. Some coaches are demonstrators, some are observers who process and adjust between reps. Standing back and watching isn't automatically a sign that someone isn't coaching. But here's the problem. Context matters enormously. When your fan base spent months publicly demanding a different person get your job, and that person shows up and immediately becomes the most visually active figure on the practice floor, the comparison becomes unavoidable. Social media doesn't grade on a curve. People see what they see, and what they're seeing is Cheryl Miller looking like the head coach, while the actual head coach looks like she's waiting for practice to end. That narrative is already spreading. It's being clipped, shared, and discussed across every platform where WNBA content lives. And with 44 televised games putting this organization under a microscope for an entire season, a narrative that starts in training camp doesn't just disappear. It follows a team through every losing streak, every questionable timeout, every game where the adjustments don't come fast enough. The visual contrast between these two women is already a problem, whether it reflects reality or not. Section 3. Who actually is Cheryl Miller in this building? Before going any further, it's worth being clear about what Cheryl Miller's actual coaching background looks like. She took over at USC in 1993 and went 42-14 over 2 seasons. Dominant record, genuine impact, real coaching ability on display. Then she stepped away and moved into broadcasting, where she spent decades as one of the most respected analysts in the sport. The basketball knowledge is real. Nobody is questioning that. But she has never coached in the WNBA, not as a head coach, not as an assistant. Her experience at the highest level of women's professional basketball is as a commentator, not a coach. So what exactly is she doing on that practice floor? The Fever haven't given a straight answer. Is she an official assistant coach with a contract? Is she a consultant brought in specifically for training camp? Is she a specialist working on one particular area of player development? Because those are very different things, and the distinction matters. A consultant who shows up for 2 weeks during camp and then disappears is one thing. A full-time assistant with real authority over player development is something else entirely. And if she's operating with real authority, who defined the boundaries of that authority and how does it interact with what Stephanie White is trying to build? The Fever's silence on this isn't just a PR issue. It's an organizational transparency issue. Players need to know who to listen to. Staff members need to know who makes final decisions. When the lines of authority are blurry before the season even starts, it creates exactly the kind of low-level dysfunction that doesn't show up in box scores until suddenly a team is underperforming and nobody can pinpoint why. Section 4. What Stephanie White actually inherited. Strip away all the noise around Miller's presence and look at what Stephanie White actually walked into. She inherited a roster that went to the WNBA Finals the previous season. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Aliyah Boston, Hap, Lexi Hull. The core is intact. This isn't a rebuilding situation. This isn't a team that needs to be torn down and reconstructed. The foundation is already there, and it's a strong one. White's stated philosophy coming into camp has been built around defensive aggression, being disruptive, being physical, getting up in opposing players early, even knowing that referees will call it tight at the start. Assistant coach January Johnson echoed that same message, talking about wanting to force opponents into uncomfortable situations from the opening possession. That's a coherent defensive identity, and it's not a bad one. But here's what this roster actually needs most. Clark just came out of USA basketball camp, playing some of the best basketball of her life. Boston is healthy after dealing with injuries that disrupted her sophomore season. Mitchell has been one of the most consistent scorers in the league for years running. This group doesn't need a philosophical revolution. They need a staff that can refine what's already working, address the specific weaknesses that showed up in the finals loss to New York, and keep the core players operating with confidence. What they don't need is uncertainty. They don't need to spend training camp trying to figure out which voice carries the most weight in the room. The roster is good enough to compete for a championship, but good rosters fall apart when the organizational structure around them isn't solid. White has the pieces. The question is whether the environment she's walking into allows her to actually use them. Section 5. The Christie Sides situation and what it reveals. Let's talk about what happened to Christy Sides, because it explains everything about the pressure Stephanie White is operating under right now. Sides took the Indiana Fever to the WNBA Finals in 2024, with a rookie point guard making her professional debut in one of the most hyped moments in women's sports history. Sides navigated that roster to the championship series. They lost to the New York Liberty, but reaching the finals in that environment was a genuine achievement. The front office fired her anyway. That decision sent a message that the organization didn't bother to soften or explain away. Making the finals is not the standard. Winning the championship is the only acceptable outcome. That's an extraordinarily high bar, and it now sits entirely on Stephanie White's shoulders. Here's what makes that complicated. White has never been a head coach at this level. Her experience in Connecticut was as an assistant, learning the system, contributing to a championship culture, but not making the final calls. Now, she's been dropped into the highest profile job in women's basketball, inheriting a finals roster, with a front office that already proved it will make a change if the result isn't a ring. And then, on top of all of that, Cheryl Miller, the person a massive portion of the fan base openly wanted for this job, shows up in her gym, doing what looks like the most visible coaching happening in that building. That's not a normal situation. That's an organizational decision that either reflects enormous confidence in White's ability to manage complex dynamics, or a front office that didn't fully think through what it would look like from the outside. Section 6. Caitlin Clark and the cost of instability. Caitlin Clark is entering her second professional season with her third head coach in 2 years. Read that again. Third head coach in 2 years. That kind of turnover at the top of a coaching staff creates instability that players feel even when nobody talks about it openly. Systems change, terminology changes. The relationships that develop between a point guard and her coaching staff have to be rebuilt from scratch. Clark handled her rookie season with remarkable composure given everything surrounding it, but composure has limits. What she needs going into year 2 is clarity. She needs to know exactly what the offensive system looks like, who she goes to in high-leverage moments, and that the voice calling plays during a fourth-quarter timeout is the same voice that's been consistent throughout the entire season. The concern with the current situation isn't that Cheryl Miller is in the building. It's that too many strong personalities operating without clearly defined roles creates exactly the kind of mixed signals that affect a point guard's ability to make fast decisions. January Johnson is talking about the defensive scheme. Miller is visibly running player development on the floor. White is supposed to be orchestrating all of it. When a player gets conflicting information, even subtly, even unintentionally, it creates a half-second of hesitation. And in professional basketball, a half-second of hesitation is the difference between a good shot and a turnover. Clark is talented enough to overcome a lot of things, but nobody should be asking her to overcome organizational confusion in a season where 44 nationally televised games mean every mistake gets replayed 1,000 times. Section 7. The players caught in the middle. While the coaching conversation dominates the headlines, the players living inside this situation deserve attention too. Kelsey Mitchell is entering a contract year. She has been one of the most consistently productive players in Fever history, averaging over 18 points per game across multiple seasons, without ever getting the national recognition her numbers deserve. A contract year means everything she does this season directly impacts her financial future. She needs an environment where the offensive system is clear, her role is defined, and the coaching staff is fully focused on putting her in positions to succeed. Organizational distraction is the last thing she needs right now. Aliyah Boston's situation is equally important. She showed during USA basketball camp that when she's healthy and playing with confidence, she's one of the most versatile young bigs in the league. But her sophomore season was inconsistent, partly injuries, partly unclear offensive roles that left her on the perimeter of plays rather than at the center of them. White has talked about building around the post players as defensive anchors, which is encouraging. But Boston needs more than defensive responsibility. She needs to know that when Clark's primary actions break down, the offense is coming to her, not around her. Raven Johnson's development is also worth watching. Assistant coaches have praised her defensive instincts and her willingness to ask questions throughout camp. She has the physical tools to become a difference maker on that end of the floor. But defensive development requires consistent coaching, clear communication, and repetition under the same system day after day. Every time the coaching structure shifts, the development process for younger players resets. These aren't just roster decisions. They're people whose careers are directly affected by whether this organization gets its house in order before opening night. Conclusion. Here's where this all lands. The Indiana Fever might genuinely have one of the most talented rosters in the entire league. Clark, Mitchell, Boston, Hull on paper. This team has championship-level pieces. Cheryl Miller's basketball intelligence is real, and if her role is clearly defined and properly integrated, her presence could be an enormous asset. But organizations don't win championships on talent alone. They win because the structure around that talent is solid, the authority is clear, and the players never have to wonder who's actually in charge. Right now, none of that is confirmed. The role is undefined. The visual narrative is already running against Stephanie White, and the front office that fired a finals coach is watching every single moment with zero patience for anything short of a title. 44 nationally televised games means this plays out in front of everyone. There is nowhere to hide, no quiet stretch of the schedule to figure things out away from the spotlight. Either this coaching arrangement works seamlessly and the Fever become the story of the season, or the cracks show up early and every training camp clip of Miller running drills while White watches gets pulled back out. The talent is there. The question was never about talent. It's about whether the people running this team can get out of their own way long enough to let it show. Stay locked with my channel, Simply Explained, for further WNBA updates.